I want to make one comment. Of course, we were davening over Yom Kippur. We were saying the Al Chaitz half a dozen times, and it just so happens that one of the Al Chaitz, which of course we all know, is Al Chait Shechatasi B'Neshech U'B'Marbis, that I was guilty of a chet of Neshech U'Marbis, which is of course what we're talking about, ribis, and the Ribbono Shel Olam obviously in Yom Kippur will accept an Al Chait. So interestingly, we know what the halach is, but this pasuk is like Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer says you can do tshuva. Remember, we learned Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yochanan several weeks ago. There's a machlokes whether you can do tshuva if you do ribbis. So Rabbi Yochanan is very strict, and he says there's no tshuva for ribbis. That's it. You do it, you're gone. And Rabbi Eliezer says not. The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, and the proof is in the pudding, because we have an al chait that the Ribbono Shel Olam will accept our charata and absolve us for neshech marbis. So as I was saying it, I was thinking about our Gemara and what we've discussed. So anyway, we should try to avoid it. But and you're going to see here in the Gemara, we're going to be learning shortly about what you do if you have to pay back, because again, that's the machlokes whether you pay back or not. And if you hold like Rabbi Eliezer, then you do pay back. And it's a fascinating discussion how and what you pay back. So, in any event, that's
All right,
that's what.
Yeah,
Mark,
so
you're back.
I lost my internet. I'm back now. Looks like I lose every 15 minutes.
Yeah. I asked for your yard sites. There was no response, and I guess we're ready to go, right?
All right. So, but if you could just tilt your screen a little bit, it's like your chin is cut. That beautiful.
You know, I can't see myself because on my upper left-hand corner, it says this meeting is being recorded right on top of me.
And there should be like a little okay or something after that.
Underneath.
There isn't. It has my name and a picture, but I can't see myself.
I don't know.
In other words,
All right.
I don't really know how it looks.
All right, you look good. Look fine now.
It looks fine. Okay. All right. So I was just saying, Menashe, that we said in Al Chet for Neshech Marbis, which is the halachas like Rabbi Eliezer, that you have tshuva for Neshech Marbis, not like Rabbi Yochanan. And here the proof is that the Ribbono Shel Olam accepts an Al Chet for Neshech and Marbis. Just a little sidelight. Okay. All right. So we're going to pick up
Shiur Malos.
Oh, Shiur Malos. Yeah, we do Shiur Malos. You have the Shiur Malos.
I had it. And that was right when my internet went down. Hold on. Close that. Come on. Share screen. Okay.
Here we go. Okay. Shiur HaMalos b'mamakim krosicha Adonai.
Shiur Malos b'mamakim krosicha.
Adonai shima v'kol itienu zecha kashuvos l'kol tachanunoi. Im avonos tishmor yo Adonai miyamoid. Ki imcho aslicha l'man tivorei. Ki visi Adonai kivso nafshi v'ledvorei hocholti. Nafshi l'Adonai mishem l'boker, shomrim l'boker. Yachel Yisrael el Adonai, ki im Adonai hachesed v'harbeim oifadus. Uyiftes Yisrael mikol avonoisov. Achen kol beis Yisrael and Asurim b'sor v'shivdi ha'omni bein b'yom v'yabosha. Mokim mirachem l'm yitzim v'shel avachem v'y'olam v'shub l'gula. Hashto v'agalov zman kori v'noi mar amen. Yeah, getting over the finish line is always the toughest thing, and we're literally almost there. And now getting over that finish line is going to be very tough. So we hope the Ribbono Shel Olam helps us move over the finish line. We're not finished, but over the finish line, so we can get the hostages back, and hopefully there'll be no more killing. And the aftermath is still going to be a big question, but we'll leave that for now. Okay, we're on Samach Hey, Omid Aleph, And let's see where we are. Okay, so we are Amr Abaya. We spoke last week. We finished last week about the interesting discussion between Rava and his father about whether or not using someone's slave is considered ribus or not, back and forth. And it turned out at the end, Rava convinced his father, Rabbi Chana, that that he essentially wasn't correct. And the halacha is that you have to not, under those conditions, not use the eved because the taka is ribis. So that was an interesting halacha. Now we're going to continue a discussion, but now the discussion turns to what happens according to Rabbi Eliezer. We spoke about Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that you can. It's not. It is retractable. You can certainly undo it, but you have to pay back. If you already received it, you have to pay back the ribis. So there's an interesting discussion now. What you're actually paying back. So here, let's see what this discussion is between Abaya and Rava. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, "Hi man de mesek zuze ribse bechavero." Okay, so I lent you money, Menashe, and then you paid me back with interest. Now, after the payback, you go to Besdin and say, wait a minute, there was ribis here and I should get a refund. I should get money back. So this is the situation where he paid the ribis in the loan, which is ribis ketutza, which is 100% midoraisa. But instead of paying the money for the ribis, let's say he lent him 100 shekel, 100 zuz, whatever, 100 shekel, and actually 100 zuz, that's the lashon here, 100 zuz, and he pledged to pay him back 110. So he was going to give him back 10 zuz, but the 10 zuz he didn't have in cash, so he said, instead of giving you cash, I'm going to give you, I have wheat or rye, whatever commodity he had, and he said he's going to give him that commodity worth 10 zuz. So he says, okay, in this case, the chute ba'arba gerura bezuza b'shuka. So he owes him 10 zuz, and in the marketplace, the way the market was holding is that you got arba gerue. Gerue is a different measure. It's a measure of wheat. So you got 4 measures of wheat for a zuz. So l'chayra, if he owes him 10 zuz in interest, he would give him 40 of these measures. But instead of giving him 40, he gave him 5 to 1, which is 50. So now we have a situation, again, we don't yet know why, but he gave him 50 instead of 40. The 40 was ribis. What is that 10? Again, we're going to find out in a minute, but that 10, l'chayra, arguably is not ribis, but we'll see. So that's v'zorvei izub chamisha. He gave him worth 5 to 1. Ki mafkini milei, when Bezdin issues a edict that he has to repay, what is he repaying? So says the Gemara, arba'a mafkini mine. What we get from him is 40 zuz, 4 of these measures per zuz, 40, not 50. Now, l'chari, you might ask, but there was 50 paid. Why shouldn't he get 50 back? Says the Gemara, idach zulale de kol mozel gabe. The borrower, in order to induce the lender to take the commodity, the wheat, he gave him a further discount. The market said 4 per zuz, and he gave him 5 per zuz. So the Gemara says the discount is not interest. interestingly enough, even though we would say that it comes, right, the source is interest, so l'chayra, maybe you should say, what is the expression? The fruit of the fruit of the ill-gotten source should be all repaid. That's the common law. The common law is that you can't benefit from something that is ill-gotten gains. L'chayra, the whole inyan of giving the extra zuz was ill-gotten. It was ribis. Nevertheless, Abaya holds that's not the case. You pay back the 40, which is true ribis ketzutza, but you don't pay back the extra 10. Now, he's not, okay, that's Abaya's position. Right here comes Rava Omar, Chamisha mafkina minei. No, not true. You have to give back all 5 per, which means 50 of these measures. Why? Even though you might argue, and this is an interesting machlokes, even though you might argue that it was goodwill on the part of the borrower. It wasn't ribis. It was goodwill. He wanted to give him, maybe it was because they were friends, had nothing to, it could even be having nothing to do with the transaction. But according to Rava, it is what I just said before. It looks like it's coming from the illegal act of ribis. Therefore, says Rava, you can't distinguish between what you might think is the actual ribis, the 4 per, because that was the market. The market was 4 per. So if you gave him 4 per, that would have been the 10 zuz, the 10 zuz of ribis. That's what it would have been. But since he gave him 5 per, that now is the fruit of the poison tree, and therefore you cannot distinguish between one and the other. So this is a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. And again, the Gemara doesn't go into halacha, but typically we go with the later of the Rava was a student of Abaye, so we go with the latter usually. Again, specifically, I could look at the halacha, but that would typically be the way we would look at it. But when you think about it, it all looks like one transaction. Yes, you could say you did me a big favor, but if the favor stems from ribis, then Rava seems to have a solid approach that you can't distinguish between what is actually the ribis and the discount never would have happened, is the point. He never would have given 5 to 1 if not for the fact that he was paying him ribis. So Rava's theory is they're inseparable. You can't say, 4 was ribis, but 1 was not ribis. And that's an argument that makes sense. It really, it resonates that you shouldn't benefit. Now, if you wanted to, on the side, give him just because he was a nice guy, and he said, you know what, I'm going to be, in other words, the halacha is that the Bezdin will give an edict for 5, but he can say, I'm Michael you. We said this thing more, he can forgive. So if he wants to be a nice guy and said, look, the ribis was only 4, but I gave you 5, you don't have to pay me 5. You only have to pay me 4. In other words, 4 per. Anyway, but that's an interesting machlokes is whether or not indirect payment, indirect funds that attach to ribis is ribis. So Abaye clearly says it doesn't, but Rava says it does. And again, I think that's kind of where we come out at the end of the day, is that it is ribis. All right, so that's one interesting aspect of the Gemara. So now, what just happened here? Here, the ribis was, in the beginning, it was money, and then it transferred to an article. But it wasn't an article in the beginning, right? So now the question is, in money, it's pretty straightforward. The interest was 10 zuz. You got to pay him 10 zuz. But it's not so clear when it's not money, when it's a fungible item. What is it? Okay. How does one repay that article? Okay, so this is kind of ancillary to the Gemara we just talked about. We talked about exchanging the money for commodities, let's say chitim, and the Gemara told us that machlokes. So now let's go further. There's now a machlokes between Abaye and Rava. Va'omer Abaye, and not only what we just said, but Abaye also says, "Haiman demasik arba zuze deribse bechavre." Let's say that I lent you 100 zuz and you're supposed to pay me back 110. So the 10 zuz is the interest. V'oyovle gelime megave. So here's a little bit different. It wasn't wheat. Instead of giving him the 10 zuz, he gave him glima. Glima is like a coat. He gave him a coat. Okay, we're saying it's worth 10 zuz. He gave him a coat for 10 zuz. Ki mafkinin minei, when the Bezdin says it's interest, ketzutza, you got to pay back. Says Abaye, arbo mafkinin minei. You have to pay back the original agreement, which is cash. I lent you 100. You were supposed to pay me back. Okay, he says arba zuzim. You were supposed to pay me back 4 zuzim as interest, and instead I'll give you a coat worth that amount. So the Gemara says, Abaye says, when the Bezdin says repay, you can only get cash, but you can't ask the malveh to give back the coat. Very, very interesting. In other words, the coat was an exchange, but once you are committed already, the chayra, you would think that since the coat came from Ribis, why can he not demand back his coat? Says Abaye, no, the halacha is the coat was already given, and therefore you cannot request the coat. You can only get back the money. Rava Amar, and again we have a machlokes. Rava says, "Galima mafkidim minei." Of course you can get back the coat. My tama, right? Ki hecha delo limru. So people, in other words, now this is a Mar Zion issue. People shouldn't go around saying glima the mafke koi, the coat that the lender is wearing, glima de ribsehi, is a glima of ribis. So this is very interesting. So Rava is now concerned not just with the payback. The payback, okay, he has to give him 4 zuz, but since he gave him a coat, he has to give him back the coat, because a coat is something he'll wear on the street, and everybody will say he's wearing a coat of ribis, and they'll sort of besmirch him. So Rava says to protect his dignity and honor, it's better that if the Bezdin says repay with money and not with the coat. What's the difference? What's the difference between this and the first case? So what do you think would be the difference? In the first case, he could repay with the commodity, and here, according to Rava, he cannot repay with the commodity. So it's an interesting halacha that Chazal was makbid that since the glima, the coat, is front and center. It's a small town. Everybody knows Reuven lent Shimon money. He gave him a coat. Now the Bezdin says give back the interest. You give back the coat so that it should sort of quiet down the whole event. That okay, maybe whatever it was a mistake. You shouldn't have done it. So therefore, it's front and center. He has to give it back. But now here's the subtlety of it. When it comes to the machlokes on whether or not the commodity, like a food or anything else, which is not front and center in front of you, can you say, wait a minute, who's going to know? So the halacha is that it's different. That you don't have to give back the commodity because the commodity is not in everybody's face. It's wheat. Okay, it's a fruit, whatever it happens to be. So there's a difference between a glima, which represents something which is obvious to everybody, and wheat, which is not obvious to anybody. So there is a different halacha for whether or not it's front and center. Again, Maris Ayin. There's no Isser here. It's Maris Ayin, and it's going to be a busha for the lender. So Rava wants to protect him and say, you're going to walk around. It's like you're going to have Cain's horn on you. You're going to walk around, and everybody's going to talk about you. Better that you just end the whole event and not be the object of people's scorn. So that's an interesting observation, and something that we can take from us is that. Particularly in a case like this, I mean, the Isser of Iribis certainly is far greater than Maris Ayin, but Maris Ayin does play a role. Maris Ayin is something you should try to avoid, and where there isn't direct Maris Ayin, we say, okay, we can right the wrong, but we can right it in different ways. In this case, giving a commodity, wheat. But when you are dealing with something that is front and center and would really be Maris Ayin, and since the halacha is like Rava anyway, then you should give back the coat, so that no one should then go ahead and have a taina on the lender that he took ribbis, because they won't know necessarily he's wearing the coat, so he made off with ribbis. That's what people might say. So if they didn't hear about the Bezdin's psak, then he had to give it back, they would say, okay, he's a cheater, and he got away with it. So we're sensitive to that. So this Gemara shows us that Maris Ayin does play a role, even though the halacha, Maris Ayin is not a halacha. Maris Ayin is a sort of a rabbinic interpretation that we shouldn't sort of be misled. In fact, think about it. What can Maris Ayin lead to? It could lead perhaps to Lifnei Iver, because if he gets away with it and walks around with the coat, then the next guy's going to say, you know what? I'm going to lend with interest too. There's no repercussion. He has the coat. Why shouldn't I do the same thing? Again, he won't know the fine point of it, that the Bezdin made him repay, etc. So in order to avoid, the Lifnei Iver is a stepping stone to other Isurim. Lifnei Iver is not an Isur in the Torah. Okay, that's a rabbinic addition that one should not, you shouldn't put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. So the Maris Ayin is not an Isur in the Torah. Lifnei Iver is. So if the Maris Ayin is, according to Rava, something we have to be concerned about, it's because the Maris Ayin can potentially lead to the Isser, which is an Isser, of Lifnei Iver. So it's an interesting interpretation of our Gemara. All right. So now we see the two machlokes between Abai and Rava, but there's a difference between what you're repaying. A commodity that's sort of under the radar, and a commodity that is squarely in the eyes of the radar, so that people will understand and have a necessarily negative opinion. And Rava says you can't do it. Now, so now we're going to finish this section with one other twist. Okay, so we're seeing different ramifications of interest. What is interest? What is repayment of interest? How you repay it? If you substitute, we talked about using someone's apartment for free. We talked about using someone's Eved for free. The Gemara gave us all kinds of different circumstances of how this ribbis can play out. So there's one more the Gemara is going to tell us about, and that is the machloikis here, when the Bezdin says you have to repay the interest, what happens if the malveh, let's say the malveh lent 100 zuz, and the interest was 10 zuz, and so he's supposed to pay him 10. When it comes to paying the 10, the malveh says, "Don't give me 10, give me 9." Okay, this is in the beginning. Okay, before anything else happens, the lover is about to repay him and give him the interest. And he says, "No, I'm not going to take 10 from you. I'm going to take 9." So L'chari is a good guy because he's discounting at 10%. But how do we treat that in halacha? So the question really is going to be whether or not the 9 is all he has to repay, or because they agreed on 10, somehow he has to pay him 10, even though he only accepted 9. That's a little different twist now on the halacha of ribis, is whether you go by what they agreed or whether you go by what he actually paid him. Omar Rava, so Rava says, "Hi man the masik tresa zuzi de ribse bechavrei." So the ribis was 12 zuz. When he made him the loan and says, "You have to give me 12 zuz," whatever the amount of the loan was, it doesn't matter. But he says 12 zuz, you have to give me. And the masik tresa zuz de ribse bechavre, and the lender then said, when it came to collection, "Don't give me 12, you don't have to give me 10." Okay. So now the lender went to the borrower. The borrower has property, and he says, "I want to rent this apartment from you, and the rental rate," listen to this is interesting, "the rental rate is 10 zuz, let's say, for a night, 10 zuz for a night. V'agrenale betracer." But the borrower rented it to the lender for 12 zuzeh, which is the amount of the original interest. So the interest was 12 zuzeh, and instead of giving him the 12 zuzeh, the lender said, "I'd like to rent your apartment in lieu of that interest," and the going rate was 10, but he charged him 12. Okay, so now he's getting it for free, but the lender, so to speak, is overpaying for the rental because the rental should only be 10. That's in effect what's going on here. So now, okay, that happened. Now they went to Bezdin, and they have to repay the ribis. Now it's going to be a discussion what he has to repay. What does he have to repay here? Why? Ki mafke minei, because when the Bezdin says you have to repay, says the Gemara, says Rava. Now remember, Rava is the machmir here, right? He's the one who is a little bit more on the not as lenient as Abaya. So what is, according to Rava, Tresa mafkina minei? He has to repay the borrower 12 zuz. Now remember, no money changed hands here. 12 was the interest. 12 was the interest. The going rate for the rental was 10. So in essence, what is the lender doing? He's forgiving 2 zuz to the borrower, because he was willing to take the apartment for 10, even though he was owed 12. But the borrower, on the other hand, charged him 12. He overcharged him the market, but he charged him the amount of the interest. So, l'chaira, you might argue, wait a minute, it wasn't 12 that he paid him, that he collected was only 10. So now the Bezdin says repay. Why should he repay 12? He never got 12. The market rate was 10, and that's what he rented. The fact that the borrower overcharged him, why should the lender be mechuyev to pay back the extra 2? It's a fascinating thing, because even though 12 what was the interest, but Lamaisa at the end of the day, he was willing to forgive 2 zuzeh by renting for 10. So why should he have to pay 12? That's the question here. In other words, according to Rava, nope. You don't give him the benefit of the doubt that he rented it for, that it should have been 10. You have to go back and you have to pay the entire 12. That's Rava's position. Okay? Omalei Rav Acha medifta l'Ravina, says Rav Acha medifta to Ravina, he's going to ask the kasha on Rava. Dil malay, lay malay. So the lender should say okay, so the Bezdin says pay 12. So the lender comes to the borrower and says to him, Ki igra hachi, when I rented the apartment for 12 zuzeh, right? I overpaid, I rented for 12. Why? The havekor mishtarsali. Because it didn't matter to me. I was getting a benefit. I lent you 100 zuz. You're supposed to pay me back 12. You gave me the apartment. The apartment was, in other words, the apartment was my payback. Forget about the amount of money. The apartment was my payback. So you gave me the apartment. That was the ribbis. Hashtag lo mishtarali. But now that the Bezdin is coming back and saying you can't do it because it's ribbis, could agra kula almahu de agra. So then why should I allow you to overcharge me for an apartment that's only worth 10 zuz? Right? So why should I repay 12 zuz? I only did it because it didn't matter. You gave me the apartment that was in lieu of the ribbis, and the ribbis, okay, it was 12, but the apartment was for 10, but I kind of said, it doesn't matter. I'm renting the apartment, it's good enough, even though it's less than what you should have paid me. Remember, no money was exchanged, only talking about the commodity, about the rental. So l'chayra, in the lender's mind, he was doing the borrower a favor because he was giving him more, so to speak, money for his apartment than the apartment was worth. And he was willing to do it. But now that the Bezdin wants to exact the money, the lender comes back to the borrower and said, why should I pay you? You overcharged me. Yes, I lent you 100 and you're supposed to pay me back 12, but you didn't pay me back 12. You paid me back only 10 because 10 was the value of the rental. I should give you back 10. Why should I give you back 12? Right? So that's the kasha here. Rava says you have to give back 12, notwithstanding that the market was 10. And so the kasha is, the lender says to the borrower, I did it as a favor to take the apartment instead of saying, in other words, he could have said, I'm renting the apartment and give me 2 zuz in addition. Because the apartment is only 10 and you have to owe me 12. So give me 2 zuz and the apartment. He didn't say that. He said, I'll take the apartment. And so he knows he's paying more, but it doesn't matter to him. But now that the Bezdin is going to collect from him, then it matters. He's going to come back and say, you overcharged me. That's not fair, right? Because in the market, you're not allowed to do that. So you overcharged me. I'm going to pay you back the value of the lease, which is 10. So that's the Gemara's kasha. I mean, it's fascinating because we're getting down now to the point where we have to try to understand what ribbis really is. Okay, so if I'm going to charge you 12 zuz ribbis, and that 12 zuz is going to be, in essence, discounted to 10, it's going to be discounted to 10, and the Bezdin says repay, does the Bezdin have to honor your agreement to discount to 10? Right? That's really the question, because it's only worth 10. So I never got 12 zuz from you. All I got from you was 10. You happen to say, I'm going to charge you 12 because you didn't want to give me 2 extra zuz. So I said, okay, Mavata, it's okay. I don't mind because I'm renting it free. But now when it comes to repay, you overcharged me, so I shouldn't have to pay you 12. I only have to pay you 10. That's the kasha here. In other words, so is that discount that the malve gave to the love, does that carry forward when the Bezdin says, return the money? Right? Fascinating question. And for the Gemara, so the Gemara says, Mishum the Armale. Why does he have to give him back the 12? Because, interesting, this is an interesting theory, because the Melova can say, Savras vikibalt, you knew that the market was 10, and yet you accepted it for the entire 12. You could have said to me, Love, I'm happy to take the apartment for 10, because that's the market, and give me 2 extra zuz. You were Mavata, you gave it up. You said, no, I'm not going to claim it. So since you gave it up and the Bezdin says you have to repay the agreed amount for the loan, now you have to pay me 12. So it's an interesting twist that the Bezdin is going to go by the original agreement, 12 zuz, even though the lender discounted and never would have taken 12. He would only have taken 10 because the market was 10. Again, he could have said, give me the apartment plus 2 zuz. He didn't. So in effect, he discounted the ribbis to 10. Yet the halacha is when the Bezdin says you have to repay, they don't do the discount that the lender gave the malva gave the love. They say you have to repay what was exactly the original amount of the interest. So there too now we see a chiddush is that, and again, this is Rava, and Rava is being more machmir. I guess Abaya doesn't weigh in here, but Rava's position in every case is to be more machmir, that that ribis, you take it literally. What you lend is what you lend. You can't then fool around and later say, oh, I didn't mean to take all of it, or I took it in a commodity instead of a thing. Whatever the case may be, in every twist and turn, Rava is going to come back and say, no, it's always going to be in favor of the love, because ribis is again, he holds like Rabbi Eliezer that you can do tshuva and repay, but ribis is a very serious event, so we don't want to cut corners and say we're going to give him a break. So that's the halacha here. So let's take a look here at the end of the Gemara in Rashi. Rashi says, "Ki mafkini minei haribish shalokach kid Rabbi Eliezer." Again, we're holding like Rabbi Eliezer. The Omer ribis ketzutza yotze b'dayonin, that you can go to Bezdin, unlike Rabbi Yochanan, who says you can't. The Kamlan Kavasei l'Kamlan, because we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, so he can go back. Glima lo mafkinin minei. So according to Abai, you don't take the glima, right? Mekro kayam, the exchange, the mekach, is fulfilled. V'chatzisas haribis yachsel abalev, and he have to return the actual cash value of the ribis. V'leimelei ki agra ana kishekarte ani bedamim yakorim halalu. Says what happens? It could increase in value, whatever. So nevertheless, the glima is something he can keep, but he has to give him back the actual monetary value. Davakom mishtarli berevach hoise bo elai. So in other words, he's saying that I can basically, according to this view, make a profit if the glima was worth more maybe than the zuz itself. So he says, so that this is the machlokes. Rava says, give back the glima, so that there's no circumstance where you can profit from the ribis, because maybe the glima was worth more than 4 zuz. Yet Abai, and that's the halacha. So the halacha is that we're very makbid with ribis. We give you the benefit of the opportunity to repay, which takes the onus off the seriousness of the halacha, but you have to pay full value. And you see from this last case as well, even if the lender is willing to discount, the halacha is that he has to pay the full amount of the original ribis, even though technically he didn't get that 12 zuz. He got 10 because that's all the rental was worth. So that's, again, that's how the Gemara ends. And that's what we're going to finish this section. Now, we're going to start a new Mishnah, and we're going to see that this halacha of ribis spills over into another area. It's not just I'm lending you and you're paying me back. What are you paying me back? How are you paying me back? But there's another nuance to this. Says the Mishnah, okay, what happens if I lend you no, I don't lend you. I rent to you a piece of property. Okay. Now, I borrowed money from you, and now I'm renting you property. Or maybe it doesn't even have to be, no, it doesn't even have to be a borrowing. I rent you property. Marben al aschar. So, and this is real estate 101. You have to give me, let's say, $100 a month. But in our agreement, if you don't pay me on time, you have to pay me $110. Okay? That we do that every day of the week. That's the way the contracts are written. This way, there's an enforcement clause. You have to pay. Otherwise, the guy won't pay. So now he knows if he pays late, he has to pay more money. So marben al aschar. So this is permissible, that you can rent out a piece of property and have a clause for late payment. However, ein marben ala mecher, you're not allowed to increase the price for a sale that isn't paid on time. So the Mishnah here makes a chilek between a rental and a sale. Now, up until now, we pretty much focused on rentals. We said ribis ketzutza is ribis midoraisa on a rental, straightforward. I lend you 100, you have to pay me back 110. Now we have a different circumstance, and we're going to see how this ties into ribis, because when I rent you a property, I'm allowed to get more money if you don't pay on time. But when I sell you a property and the property has to be paid by X date, I cannot increase the price. I can't increase the price because you didn't pay me by the date. Okay, Ketzad. All right, that sounds a little odd, but Ketzad. So what does it mean? Hiskelo es chatzero. I'm renting you an apartment for Omalo, and I say to you, Hare hu lecha be'eses saloim lashana. The rental is 10 sela for the whole year. However, imshal chodesh b'chodesh. In other words, you're going to give me 10 slom for the year, but if you pay month to month, sela lachodesh, it's sela for a chodesh. So how much he's going to pay him? He's going to pay him 12 sela. Again, this is completely mutter, says the Mishnah, and we do this all the time, right? You give me 10 up front, I'll take it. Why? Because I have the 10 now and I have the use of the money, as opposed to month by month. That is mutter, says the Mishnah, says that's perfectly mutter, and that's the halacha. However, machalo esodehu, if I sell you my field, va'amalo, and then the seller says to the buyer, ime achshav atanosenli, same thing. If you pay me up front and give me the entire money, harihi shalach be'elef zuz, then I will take 1,000 zuz and it's yours. But legoren, but if you don't pay me now, but you pay me, let's say, what we call an installment, you don't pay me now, and you pay me during the goren. Goren the field is a producing field, right? He's selling him, let's say, a field that has wheat or barley or whatever the commodity is, and now is not the season for the threshing. So you give it to me now. You give me the money and it's yours. But if you delay and you give it to me during the threshing, then in Lagoren, if you give me to the threshing, mishnei also money, then you have to pay me 12. Osir, this is Osir. So what do we see? We see that a discount by a rental is permitted, right? But a discount by a sale is not permitted. And again, the Gemara is going to go into detail, and this is going to be the question of whether or not there's ribbis. How is there ribbis? Because if the deal was in the sale 1,000, but you're going to pay 1,200, the chayrit's ribbis, right? The chayrit, you're paying 200 zuz more for not paying him on time because he wanted it up front for 1,000. So that would appear to be ribbis. The question is, in the case of a rental, why? Again, in essence, why is it not ribbis? Because you're taking the money up front, right? You're taking the money up front, and otherwise you're taking it month to month, and the chayra month to month means that you're getting more money than you might have agreed. On the surface, that's the question. And we're going to go into it in more detail, but with the Gemara is giving, the Mishnah is giving us a chiluk between rental and purchase. Okay, so let's take a look. So Rashi says, "Marben ala schar, b'schar amenanach mos haschirus." You take an additional amount for the rental amount if you take it over time. Ve'ein marben al hamecher, b'schar metanach hamekach. You can't do Gemara Mafarish. So we're going to get an explanation of the Gemara, but you can sort of think about it and say, is there ribbis in both cases, or why isn't there ribbis in the case of schar, of secher, of rental, but there is ribbis in the case of mekach? Now, why is there ribbis? Why do we attach this to ribbis? Because what you're doing is you're saying, I'm selling it to you for a certain price. Right? But if you don't pay me my price, then I charge you more. So it's not the same as I lend you 100 and you pay me 110, but in essence, it is, because I'm saying I'm going to sell it to you for 100, but under the conditions that you give it to me. But if not, I'm going to charge you 120. So that 20 l'chara looks like ribbis. Looks like the same ribbis if someone lends 100 and gets back 110. Why not? Why? In other words, it certainly should look like ribbis. The question is, by rental, we're saying that the discount is not ribbis. So maybe that's the bigger chiddush, is that by rental it's not that by mecher it is, because mecher really appears to be what we call ribbis. I'll charge you 1,000, but if not, I'll charge you 1,200. But why is that not applied by schar? So the Gemara says we're going to understand. So Rashi says v'im shel chodesh b'chodesh v'im titn lischar kol chodesh b'chodsho shlo taktim lischar. You didn't give me in advance kol hashana, right? Yachad matan lisela b'chodesh. You can give me sela b'chodesh, and it's fine, right? No problem. V'im legoren. But in the case of a sale, if you're going to pay me in the threshing season, now, what does that mean, goren? l'chayra, the value of the property should be more during the threshing season than before. So that's why he was willing to give him the discount of 1,000 zuz today, so I have the money. But if I don't have the money and the threshing season comes, then I'll lose because l'chayra I can get more money in the threshing season. Ve'im legorin, says Rashi, ve'im amten lecha ad hagorin, shetimka mitvoscha v'titin li ma'osi. So then the Gemara, the Mishnah says aser. But again, theoretically, that should not be the case because I'm giving something up by selling it to you and getting the money today and having the benefit of the money. But the Mishnah is saying that if you don't get the money and you only get it later, then that's interest. Then that's a ribis. But in theory, when you think about it, the goren has more value than the initial sale. So why should it be interest? Why should it be ribis when you're going to get the benefit of something that we didn't bargain for? We bargained for the sale today. You give me the money, it's yours. When the goren comes, you get the benefit of the goren because goren has a value. You're threshing and there's a greater value. But if you don't pay me today, then l'chayra the goren is the time of the sale. At least in theory, why is it ribis? Again, this is the Mishnah, and it's a little bit questionable why the one is ribis, why the one is not ribis. Okay, so let's go into the Gemara. Let's start the Gemara. Frek zak the Gemara, ma'ishno reisha or ma'ishno seifa. What's the difference between a rental, where we say it's not ribis, and a sale that it is ribis? The reisha is rental and the seifa is a sale. Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef Zamat Travaya. So Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef both say schirus eina mishtalemes ella besof. So it's teaching us something here. This is not what we're accustomed to. Here in our law, this is not quite, but this is the halacha. The rule by rental is eina mishtalemes ella besof. When I rent you something, let's say, David, I rent you my apartment. What am I expecting? I'm expecting you to pay me rent. First month, second month. I'm not giving it to you for 12 months and then you'll pay me at the end. That's not the case here. The understanding was that schirus is paid at the end. I don't have to pay you every month for the year, but at the end of the year, I'm going to give you a lump sum for the year. That's the way it was set out. So it's already a different understanding of schirus. Schirus was paid at the end, and we're going to say, and mechira is paid at the beginning. That's going to be the difference. But schirus is paid at the end. Like Kevin, the lo mata zim lugbei. So since in the case of the rental, he gets the rent at the end, lav ager natale. Ager nater is a principle. It's a principle of ribis. But what does it mean? That it's a reward. Ager, it's a reward, nate for waiting for payment. So this is a concept that we have to understand. If I'm gonna give you something, and I'm going to allow you to use it before you pay it to me, then the payment at the end, ager nater, can be ribis. In other words, the time span, the delay, is considered ribis. That's the principle of ager nater. So Gemara says, "V'kiven de lo mota, mota zim nebei." Since he gets the rental at the end, because that's the way they did it, lav ager natale. Then there's no ager nater, because the whole principle was that you're going to pay at the end, right? In other words, I didn't do you a favor. I didn't do you a favor for waiting, because that's the way we do business. I rent it to you, you use it, and then pay me. Mashvihu de yosve shvei. So That's exactly what the deal was. That you should pay me at the end, but for ka'amale, but the owner said to the person who's renting, if you pay it to me in advance, then it is eser shloim bashana, right? So azulehu to come mizalagabe. So he's giving him a reduction, a discount. Azule is giving a reduction because of the early payment. So what happened here? And this is why the chilek between rental and sale. In a rental, the rental agreement at the time, not by us, but in the time, says I'm renting you this apartment for 100 zuz, and you'll pay me at the end of the lease. So I leased it to you, and you pay me at the end of the lease. Okay, that's it. Time goes by, he pays him. Now, Ager Nater says that if I'm going to wait to get paid, I will get extra money for that wait, and that's ribbis. That's where Ager Nater is ribbis, because I'm getting the benefit for waiting for the money. But in the case of a rental, I'm not waiting for the money. The money is supposed to come to me at the end. What I'm doing is saying to you, I'll give you a discount if you pay me in advance. If you give me the money now, I'll give you a discount. That's not ribbis. Because the principle of ribbis is, especially in rentals, is the agreement wants to get paid at the end. So at that point, if he never paid him till the end, it would be fine. The fact that he's paying him in advance can't be ribbis, because there's no ager nater. There's no waiting. And the waiting is what causes the ribbis. That's the chiddush. The waiting is what causes the ribbis. Now, what about the case of the sale? Seifa, in the case of the sale, given to Zavnaninu, since he sells it to him, the way it was done, like us, it's okay. You pay up front. It's the chiddush is on the rental, not on the sale. On the sale, you and I make a deal. 100. He says you pay me X zuz for the field. You got to pay him. It's yours. Deal is over, right? But he says, sorry, you good? Okay. Given the Zavaninu, he's saying, if you pay me right now, I'll give you a discount. What does that mean? That if you don't pay me now, hilkach aganatale, but for waiting, I'm going to charge you more. I'm going to charge you 1,000 if you pay me now, but 1,200, let's say, if you pay me then. So now we flipped the script. The payment should have been made now, not later. Payment should have been made now. I am delaying receiving the payment to give you a break. That's ager nater. Therefore, when you pay me back at the end and pay me the 1,200, the Mishnah says it's aser, because that is considered ribbis. So this is an interesting twist, and the principle of ager nater applies any time you allow someone a delayed in payment and charge more for it. Now, that's not including, for instance, a knas, right? Let's say you institute a clause that there's a fine for, whatever the payment is, when you have to pay it. That's not considered ager nater. Now, ager nater is simply an agreement to get the benefit of a delayed payment when you would otherwise not have to pay it. That, says the Mishnah, is, as Gemara is explaining, that is considered ribbis. So it's like a Rashi, schiras ein mishtalemes el lebesof min hadin. In other words, at the time, that was the halacha. We don't do that today, of course. We take rentals either month to month or at the very beginning. We never do it then. El lebesof lesof hazman hilchach kishaka b'nei sela b'chodesh dahav l'shnei ma'aseh salaim ein zeh schar hamatenes mos shehari lo neschayiv li l'shalem schiras at sof hachodesh. You only have to pay me at the end. Now he's saying sof hachodesh or at the end of the entire lease. Either way, it's at the end, not the beginning of the process. V'haida omale ime achshav titanli harihu l'cho be'esa sloim. You have a makdim le, have a mochale b'damei aschiras. He's meichel him, right? Umugale bepachas me'asara. And he's taking less than asara, and that's perfectly fine. Because why? Because there's nothing inherently wrong in that. Aval seifa gabi mecher shemeshech hamekach dino litin hamos. He has to give him the money right away. V'chi omale yimimi achshav titali harilecho be'elef. Hein dame. But if we wait for the goren schar amachtenes mosu, then there's additional money. Then that is what he's saying. The weight and the allowance of the weight is the principle of agernater, and agernater is ribbis. So this is a different slant on ribbis, because we here, it's not what we look at as the classical ribbis. It's about rental. So you have to also be very careful in business that your business also, and by the way, agernater would be considered ribbis deraisa. It's not necessarily ribbis drabanan. If you're going to do agernater, then you're basically going to do the equivalent of getting the extra money for the deal, which is what is ribbis ketzutza. So under this theory, l'chayra, we'll see further that agernater should be the equivalent of ribbis ketzutza. We'll see if that's in fact the case. But anyway, for our purposes, we now introduce this theory, and it's interesting because you see that in the time of the Gemara, I guess there was a trust factor. I mean, I give you I rent you an apartment. You don't have to pay me to the end, which means you can walk away the theory, you can walk away and not pay me the rent. So who's taking the hit here? So l'chayra, the balabas who owns the apartment has to trust the guy, whereas here it's a totally different system. And he said, and the Rashi says min hadin, that was the din. You couldn't rent it and ask him for the money up front. It was prohibited. That's a little foreign to us because that's not the way we operate. When we operate, we say we make a deal, you got to pay me, right? So I guess they were more trusting, and they figured that the renter would be erlich, and he wouldn't do something improper. So they allowed him to pay at the end. In any event, so that's the introduction to this Gemara. We'll go weiter Mitzvah Hashem next week. So